Oh my gosh, I cannot stop smiling at the little girl who roars like a lion. If you have not found her on TikTok, go do it because it'll just give you a little smile. So, anyway, today we are going to talk about how does medical trauma impact us when we experience it? There are so many areas of life and ways that medical trauma impacts us. So I wanted to give a detailed explanation in case, I don't know, you want to share it with a loved one or someone who's trying to support you who really doesn't fully understand. So, first is the physical impact of medical trauma, having a medical event, chronic illness, anything like that. It's essentially the destabilization of our physical state that happens before this event, sometimes before, sometimes it happens suddenly. So, it's a physical decompensation during and after the event. If you had a chronic illness and you went from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, then maybe it started before. But in any case, there is a destabilization of your physical state that happens. The destabilization of our physical state often leads to emotional impacts. Emotional impacts can mean anything from clinical reactions, like something we might label as PTSD, anxiety, or depression, but it could also be subclinical emotional distress, which is just kind of like having a difficult emotional response, something that grows in intensity and duration, where you get caught in this loop of emotional distress related to the decompensation of your physical state. The next is how it affects us relationally, right? When we go into a medical experience, we already have a contextualized set of roles and relationships that we've already been engaging in. And so naturally, when we experience a medical event, a situation that causes medical trauma, we don't all of a sudden shed those roles and expectations. So what ends up happening is we return to those roles and relationships, and we're expected to perform in the same way. And naturally, when we can't, or when we're going through so much distress, it changes how we show up in those relationships and in those roles. And so our context within them changes and our relationships end up suffering. The next one is the developmental impacts that it has. So we develop over the lifespan, and development can mean a lot of different things, but in the sociocultural context, it means meeting life milestones. Medical trauma and just having a chronic illness or a medical condition that we have to live with can disrupt our developmental spectrum. And sometimes what that means is it's going to disrupt school, work, our relationships. Sometimes for people, it's whether or not they're able to have kids. For some people, it's whether or not they're able to continue with their education, start in their career. Maybe they have to leave a career they've had for a really long time. So it really disrupts their sense of meeting their life milestones. Next is our sense of identity. It dysregulates how we perceive ourselves. There becomes this gap between our past self, and then we have difficulty conceptualizing who our future self will be in the face of this. Our identity is wrapped up in our sense of how we move through the world, our abilities, our life goals, our self-worth. All of these things can be disrupted with medical trauma, and then we get confused about how to move forward. Then there are existential and spiritual effects. This usually comes in when we start to ask ourselves, why? Why did this have to happen? How will I go on? And when we struggle to answer these questions or feel a sense of peace with these questions coming up, then we struggle to heal because we aren't sure how to resolve those questions. We often ruminate on them and linger on them, and experiencing something as jolting as a medical trauma can lead to this. The next is leisure time, and it disrupts our ability to even have leisure time a lot of the time. So when our normal routines are altered, when the things that we do and how we do them, like just regular activities when we're not in work or school, right? Or cleaning the house, anything that we do that's a joyful activity, if we have to change how we do those things, or if we're able to do those things, what it can do is it can impact us in like a domino effect. where if those things were protective against the negative effects of stress, if they helped you cope and maybe were preventative for things like depression and anxiety, and now you can no longer do them, then you're left going, how do I cope? And often this can lead people to some of those clinical diagnoses like anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth. These types of things also tend to give us a sense of purpose, right? They tend to be our love projects, if you will. And if we can't engage in them anymore, then sometimes people will find themselves asking, who am I now? What am I going to be about now? What kind of things can I even do that I enjoy? Another way that it can impact us is financially. We know that having a health event can cause financial distress. It can lead to a person not being able to work because it's a medical condition, and or maybe finish college, so long-term financial stability can be affected. And health problems can also be caused by financial distress. We know that financial stressors can damage relationships and emotional and physical well-being, but also medical events can cause the financial distress that then goes on to cause even more relationship, emotional distress, and physical distress. In summary, while I think the thing that's important to note and remember is that while PTSD is one of the effects of trauma, especially medical trauma, that we tend to know about and be most familiar with and take most seriously, that it's important to remember that medical trauma, or really any type of trauma, but in this case medical trauma, can have wide-reaching impacts that cause a domino effect in people's lives, and it doesn't have to be PTSD for it to be really bad. The other thing to pay attention to is that a lot of these can either be like level 1 or level 2 effects. What I mean by that is that level 1 effects would be effects that happen directly as a result of having the medical trauma or the medical crisis. The level 2 effects are things that come after and happen as a result of residual effects, the aftermath of the trauma and of the medical event as the person is trying to move forward with their life. It's also important to note that in the medical community, when you go to the doctor and you're getting medical care for an illness or a health condition, doctors focus primarily on that physical impact of the medical event. All of the rest of it tends to get swept under the rug or not recognized, or that the doctor might not even think to attribute some of these emotional aspects or other aspects to the medical event itself. And sometimes we don't even recognize that this is a result of that medical event. The key here is just to know that medical trauma is life-changing, and it can have lasting effects that echo through a person's life, and that it's contextual and what it looks like is different for each of us, but nevertheless, it should be taken seriously.